what are you hearing back from students right now? Are you getting any teachers telling you right now, I'm not going back, I'm too afraid?
There are teachers that are saying that is for sure. But I would say that the majority of the educators that I'm talking to and listening to are basically just concerned because there's not a lot of finalized plans in districts and the numbers keep escalating in some places. And so it's just a lot of uncertainty. And if
Mhm.
you really think about it, school typically would start after Labor Day, and that's still a long way off. And so there's just a lot of anxiety about the unknown. But yes, there are a few that have said if it continues to rise like this, I don't want to return.
Do you guys have a position at all on that? And if things do continue to rise, obviously Michigan isn't Arizona or Texas, but do you have a stance on that at all?
So our MEA board meeting is on Thursday. It's the board of directors from across the state. We are going to unpack this and maybe officially take another position. However, we believe in local control, and there is a roadmap that the governor's task force laid out. We just hope that the administrators and the community members sit down with the educators and the health officials, and they look at what's going on in their community and they design a plan that works for them at the local level. That's our official stand right now because everyone's different. What's happening in the UP is not the same as what's happening in Jackson or Kalamazoo or Novi, for example.
We're doing a story, we put a reporter on one story today about parents trying to take matters into their own hands, and they're creating, I'm sure you've heard them at this point, homeschool bubbles, where you've
Yeah.
got a number of families, 4 or 5, putting their kids together and maybe hiring a teacher to come in and try and teach them every day. What do you think when you hear plans like that coming from parents who would otherwise have their kids in public schools?
I can't blame them. This is a very difficult time. I have two children, and we're both in that situation. One's going to be entering, they've got a middle schooler, one that just left elementary. And so the emotional up and down that we have endured the last 6 months, especially celebrating milestones of leaving elementary school, it's been hard. And to think about, the unknown, do we start virtually? Are we in person? Is it going to ping pong back and forth? What's this going to look like? I can see myself as a mother thinking about, okay, maybe homeschooling would be an option and getting a pod. However, after witnessing the remarkable programs that I saw and the outreach that the teachers did, at least in my district, and knowing that it happened across the state, I would elect one of the online programs that my local district is doing, because then they could also participate in extracurriculars, whether it's online, they could still maintain friendships within their grades. And then, if they felt comfortable enough, I could send them right back next year. And I would say the majority of our public schools across the state are trying to engage in some sort of online virtual option for parents. And I think it's great.
Have you gotten any instruction from the state at all about what we're going to do on count days? Because it is very reasonable to think that we either won't have kids in school on count day, or we're going to see very reduced numbers, which in normal circumstance would really impact funding for next year.
So that decision has not been made yet. We are hoping that there will be some flexibility with count time as far as minutes in a seat and what that would look like in the classroom. But at this time, that has not been decided.
Okay. Any timetable on when it may be?
It would be great if it was sooner rather than later, but I
Yeah.
think that how things work sometimes in government, and sometimes things take some time.
Are you saying
And
things don't
so
move lightning fast in legislatures?
this is true.
Yeah.
However, that this is an urgent matter,
Yeah.
and I'm hoping that we can start to think of things. Sometimes once I start peeling back the onion and I start thinking about this, I sometimes feel like this is a great opportunity for us to rethink education in a different way. And this, I think when the dust settles, there's going to be some things that we felt that were a positive thing that came out of COVID. Is of course taking into account if someone lost a family member or a close friend, all of those losses, that has been very difficult for many. We've lost members. Aside from that, though, it's really forced us out of the box in I mean, everybody engaging in Zooms, right? And having meetings in a different way. And, who would have thought you'd celebrate family birthdays this way? And yet, honestly, I think about, I've spent more time seeing friends from college and across the state online than I haven't seen in years. And this has been available to me, and I don't know why I never thought about utilizing it.
Can you imagine if this had happened 20 years ago and we didn't have all this technology? Ugh.
I know, I thought about that. The isolation definitely would be different. But then I sometimes think about if we didn't have all this technology, would the anxiety level be a little bit less? Because I think that sometimes technology and social media amplifies our stress.
Oh, I'm right there with you on that one. I'm a guy who works in media. I can't disagree.
Yeah, no offense.
No, none taken. It's
mostly social media.
Hey, I get it. Yeah, but we work in that too. So has this been talked about at all with districts or statewide? If a teacher tests positive, are they going to have, if a teacher tests positive, are they going to be required to quarantine for 2 to 3 weeks? And is their sick leave going to be covered and paid for that? Do you know?
So there's two parts to your question.
Yeah.
The first part is we are heavily relying on guidance from the county health departments. And from what I am hearing, that school districts are still working with them to figure out the best plan. I mean, if you think about it, that is a huge concern, especially if a student tests positive. And, then how far do you quarantine down? I mean, it kind of is like this crazy web. The child probably has siblings. They may or may not be on a bus. Did they see kids in a hallway or cafeteria? So it seems that sometimes you address one problem and then it's like, okay, well, we're going to find a sub. Is that sub traveling around different buildings? Who's that sub been exposed to? And you think you have a solution, and then you find a couple more what ifs and ands. And the second part of your question, could you repeat the second part of your question?
Is their sick leave going to be covered?
My apologies.
That's okay. It was a long question.
Yeah, it was. That is a local bargain issue. And so, there are districts that are being really great and proactive, and they are setting up COVID sick banks where teachers can donate their days if they have a surplus into a mutual bank, and then it wouldn't affect the teacher's individual or any educator's individual bank of days to help cover some of that leave. And so, it's the quarantining time, I think, that we're more concerned about than if a person truly is ill. Then some districts have short-term disability and other things can kick in. So that is a local decision. Again, that's something that's bargained, but I'm very excited about the positive collaborative solutions that districts are coming up with.
Is there any legal liability that's going to be in place if a student, teacher, or staff member gets COVID-19? Do you know? Has that been talked about?
It's been talked about, and I think that the attorneys and the experts and the administrators, there are a lot of people that are still trying to figure out what that's going to look like. Even from a parent standpoint, what happens if a child tests positive and the parent's upset because they think that it maybe came from the school? So I think that that's another thing we need to work through.
Last question, then I can let you get out. And this is open-ended, so take it wherever you want. What are the biggest concerns teachers have right now that they are coming with?
Well, there are many.
I know.
And so I think the number one issue, it's funding and safety, because they are directly tied together. To be able to implement many of these recommended, highly recommended, and even required actions that were required by the governor's task force or suggested, it takes money. Face masks and cleaning and materials, social distancing, smaller class size. How do you address transportation? So in theory, a lot of these things seem reasonable, but if we don't have the resources to be able to do it, then it makes it very difficult. And so our number one hope right now is that the HEROES Act is passed. School districts across the state, as well as many of our municipalities and our police stations and fire, will get the funding that we need to be able to provide safe environments for our students and our employees. Because I want to say and be very clear, teachers do want to go back to work. Our bus drivers want to drive the buses and the secretaries want to be there. We all know that instruction is, done the best in person. And we need to be safe, and we need to have safe environments for our students and our families. And so to have the resources to do that is really where the struggle is. And I'm also going to add that the districts that are doing a great job with this are also the ones that have the most resources in a good year. And so, in a year where you have a high school class that has 38 kids in it, and then another district where I taught, my max was 29, and a science class was 26 at the high school level. Well, that's a whole different, this just looks different when you're trying to cut it in half, maybe, and cohort a group. And so it comes down to resources. And furthermore, there's already a teacher shortage. And with retirements and things of that nature, I think it's just a perfect storm. So there are no quick, easy solutions, but passing that HEROES Act would be one easy step that could get this going.
Well, and I'm going to ask you one more question, considering everything you just told me.
Sure.
Because I saw an interview with the Fairfax County Superintendent, Virginia, which I believe is either the largest or the second largest school district in the nation behind Los Angeles. And he said if we are to adhere to all the guidelines they want, we would need the square footage equivalent of 5 more Pentagons. Do you think it's possible to institute all the guidelines that would be needed for our schools in 6 weeks?
So 6 weeks isn't going to be a challenge in some places. But I think if we were realistic and we took the map and we started unpacking, different phases that the state's in and different threat levels of the virus, I think that'll be easier for some than others.
Like the UP versus Detroit, yeah.
Correct. I also think that, there are some simple things. You can change your classroom in an elementary setting where maybe you eliminate circle time sitting on the floor and you get rid of some of your stations. You stop having shared manipulatives. There are things that can be done in a very low cost manner. Again, it might require some longer time or less time, some flexibility in the schedule, but that goes back down to that student count time in days and minutes, because we're going to need time in between classes to clean, to disinfect, and to organize. And so in the past, some of those minutes were not counted as instructional time. And so there's going to be some flexibility that we're going to need to add in. But let's say that we were able to figure out the school day, manage the cafeteria. Some are going to close the cafeteria. Students might eat at their desk. You figure out hall passing time. You look at having recesses on staggered levels where kids are with their cohort or class. There are things that are being done. But then we get back down to the transportation issue, because there is a bus driver shortage in addition across the state. And I can tell you that my son has ridden on a bus many times when there's 3 kids in a seat and that bus is loaded and parents rely on transportation. And how do you social distance that? Especially looking at the CDC requirements. So that is one of those things where you get so close and then you're like, well, what about this? And then it becomes another challenge.